For thousands of years, the number 7 has been considered extremely lucky. The Calamari team secured the 7th Parachain slot today, and we will see if that luck continues as we speak with Kenny Lee to learn more about the history of their project, their goals for the future, and how the Calamari Parachain plans to bring strong privacy to the DeFi world. Okay, everybody, today on the show we had Kenny Lee from Manta and Calamari Networks, and they're building a really cool product called MariSwap, which is a lot like Uniswap. It's an AMM. So there are centralized exchanges like Kraken that you're quite familiar with, allow you to trade coins using an order book. But now there's newer technology called a DEX, a decentralized exchange, and they use a protocol called AMM, or Automated Market Maker, in order to facilitate trades without a middleman. Today, we talk about a really cool extension to that capability around privacy and anonymity, and Kenny's going to get into that. So stick around. It's a really great show. You're going to enjoy this one. Hi there, and welcome to the Parachain Auctions podcast, hosted by Kraken. I'm Brian Hoffman, Crypto Platform Product Lead, and I'm glad you could join me out here on the cutting edge of crypto technologies. On this show, you'll hear from leaders and innovators around the world building parachains on Polkadot and Kusama. Tune in for insights from the best and brightest about their new projects. Whether this is the first you've heard of Parachains or you're a DeFi aficionado, come with us behind the scenes as we explore the technology of the future today. Today we have with us Kenny Lee, who's a core contributor of the Manta Network and subsequently Calamari. Welcome to the show, Kenny. I'm really glad to have somebody, in the ocean theme. It's like fitting for Kraken to have somebody. So very excited about that, among other things. So welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian, for having me here. We are trying to go with the ocean theme. We've got a lot of events planned around that. So thanks for noticing. Although I guess calamari, is it? I actually haven't looked this up, but I all I know is calamari is like the deep fried dish version of squid. I don't know if it actually translates directly into squid. So we might be cheating a little there.
Yeah, it's like escargot or something. Either way, I personally think calamari is delicious. Not necessarily the topic of this podcast, but I just wanted to put that out there for the listeners, in case anybody wants to buy me some, dinner sometime. Your project touches on a really, really important part of crypto as a technology, and that's around privacy and anonymity and security, which is really cool. I have background in PKI technology, public key infrastructure, and encryption, and so I find it personally super interesting. But I'm really excited to hear more about how it plays in the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem. I think a lot of people are familiar with things like Zcash and Monero. And for people that have been around for a long time, a lot about the limitations around Bitcoin in general, not being completely anonymous, which I think a lot of people don't understand at first. Mm-hmm. But to kick off this conversation, I'd really love to get to know you personally a little bit better. That's what we like to do on the show. So I know that you're a core contributor, which means it implies you are one of many people working on this, and it is a decentralized product. But for this podcast, I'd like to hear a little bit about your background and how you came to start working on Manta.
Yeah, sure. So, and I just want to throw out a couple of definitions here. It's something that we kind of use internally just to make our lives easier. So, with Manta Network and Calamari Network, what we call ourselves is Manta-Mari, just to kind of throw the words together. So when I say Manta-Mari, these concepts apply to both Manta and Calamari. And then also with like Polkadot and Kusama, we just say Pokasama. So it's just like an internal lingo. So if I start spitting those words out while we're talking, just forgive me. But a little bit about myself. So I've been in the crypto space for a while, just as more of a general enthusiast learner. And it kind of started back in around 2013. Was doing a cloud computing company at the time. And with cloud computing, you have to have physical servers everywhere anyway. And so it just kind of begged the question of how do we cover these operational expenses of servers. And so that got me a little interested in Bitcoin mining. And, one thing led to another. Got a little bit deeper into the crypto space, did a few projects. And then around the 2018, the 2017, 2018, the most recent previous sort of bull run, that was pretty fun. I started writing a lot about it, started my own sort of blog just to educate people because, all of a sudden people start asking you the same questions at once, right? So might as well just centralize the answers there. And so, I did that for a bit. And then in around 2018, when things started slowing down a little, then I decided to go pursue my MBA. I went to MIT, and that's where I met the rest of my co-founders for Manta-Mari. And so I was getting my MBA there, and one of my co-founders, colleagues, Victor, he was studying at Harvard with his master's in econ at the time, but he was running the blockchain club over there. I was helping out with the blockchain club here. He was cross-registered for some courses at MIT in blockchain. I was a teaching assistant there for those courses, and so that's how we met. And then Shuma, our other co-founder, he was working at Algorand at the time, which is came out of MIT. And so we were all in the Cambridge area, all basically centralized in that sort of spot. But yeah, so that's really how we met and started Manta-Mari.
Just a couple average Joes from Harvard and MIT, getting together. That's quite a pedigree.
You can toss the brands around just to kind of get people to perk up. But honestly, at the end of the day, we're just scrambling around like everyone else.
I joke, but it is true though. I mean, a lot of these technologies and capabilities are like super complex, and it's like, you read these Forbes articles. It's like, well, Jimmy Joe from down the street came up with a new AMM protocol. It's like, oh, okay. Well, how much can you trust that? But you guys have been working on some really fascinating tech. So it's maybe you could just kind of give us a quick synopsis of what is Manta-Mari exactly.
Yeah, so a little bit about, Manta-Mari, Manta Network and Calamari. So we are building the privacy layer for Polkadot and Kusama. And so respectively within each ecosystem, right, like we are launching a couple of our own products around that. And you had mentioned, right, like Zcash, Monero. And the way that we like to think about it here is that on the very base layer, we are similar to these chains in the manner that we are, privacy preserving, using zero knowledge proof specifically. And so it's more of an algorithmic approach to on-chain privacy. But I mean, all that jargon aside, what it really means is essentially like we're able to transact and in fact swap assets in a privacy preserving manner for users. So they can, maintain their privacy while they're interacting within the Polkadot and Kusama chains. Where we kind of differ between ourselves and the existing sort of chains that you mentioned is, well, one, we play in different ecosystems, but two is that we specialize in allowing users to privatize any type of parachain asset, including DOT and Kusama and other wrapped major crypto assets. And so what that implies is that we're not asking people to use Manta token to make private transfer or use Calamari token to make private transfer. We're allowing users to take various parachain assets, privatize those assets, and subsequently transfer those assets privately. And so, we've been working, we just recently finished up XCM. So XCM, sorry, more jargon, but it's just one of the value propositions of Polkadot and Kusama where you're able to communicate across different projects. So like Akala and Manta Network, we recently did sort of a test to communicate and bring Akala tokens to Manta Network, privatize those Akala tokens and transact those Akala tokens privately. And so, that all kind of goes back to saying that we allow users to privatize various parachain assets and transact privately. And I also kind of talked about MantaSwap, which is our private AMM DEX. So there is that swapping functionality as well. So you're able to change to different Parachain assets through our network, also in a privacy preserving way. And specifically in that way, because it is AMM, the privacy layer there specifically obfuscates the user identity. Yeah. So that's really us in a nutshell. I think long-term vision is definitely trying to make privacy a utility. I think when you look at things like Web 2.0, right, centralized sort of solutions. I mean, I think the key value proposition there is that there is that layer of privacy. Sure, that like when a hacker suddenly exposes you and you're on haveibeenpawned.com or something, right? But like besides that part, right? Like I can't go into your bank account right now, Brian, and just like view all of your transactions and your credit card statements and stuff, right? Like I have to have
I hope not.
Really well, yeah, right. I mean, I
mean, I don't know. You're from MIT, so if anybody knows, it's probably you.
No. Thanks for overestimating me.
Now I'm
but
scared.
I want to set expectations here. But yeah, I would essentially have to steal your identity, right, in order to do that, and that's kind of against the law. But on chain, it's very different. As soon as you send me a transaction, I could just be like, oh, you know what? Let me see what Brian has done in the past, and just like hop on your wallet address through some block explorer and look at all the little chains that you've interacted with or smart contracts you've interacted with, all the transactions you've made to what wallet address, right? All of this is fully public. And I think this alludes to exactly what you were talking about earlier, where like people don't understand that blockchain is not actually private. It's the pseudo anonymous layer that's your wallet address, which is kind of like a Reddit username. But then once people know your Reddit username, they see all of your Reddit history, and it could or could not be embarrassing. I don't want to get into details about that part, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's a lot to unpack there. So I do want to talk about both of the product offerings that you guys are going to be rolling out or are already rolling out. But let's focus on real quick just the process of like acquiring one of these privacy assets. So if I have, let's say I have Ether and I want to bring it into the ecosystem. So essentially I'm just spitballing here. I could like send it over to one of these other bridges on one of the other parachains, convert it into some kind of parachain asset, some other, token. And then I can use cross-chain messaging to kind of transport it over to Manta Network or Calamari Network. And there, what happens then? So then the coin gets what? Is it wrapped or is it like minted into a new privacy token? Like how does that mechanism work exactly?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to think about it is definitely the wrapped concept. And so through being quote unquote wrapped, we do mint that privacy preserving corresponding token. And that is fully on Manta-Mari. And then users can privately transact to different wallet addresses, right? It's a UTXO model. So we do have wallet addresses. So it's not like a one-time use and burn. It's more so like an entire sort of, layer one chain onto itself.
Okay. And so you have the first product is MariPay or I guess Manta Pay. So in this case, so now you have these privacy tokens, and essentially, from what I understand in the white paper, it is essentially like you have an amount that you have minted, you have the private key, and then you have some kind of proof that's all part of the ZK Snarks process. And we don't have to get into that here, obviously, but you can if you go to the website, right, and read the white paper. But essentially, you have like proof of this ownership, and when you're transacting, like what is like the bare minimum information needed to like actually reliably transfer value to someone, but not like reveal too much about them? I mean, is it just the amount and that they have it, or like how does that work exactly? Maybe give like a high level description of that.
Yeah. So actually, when you're transacting to someone on, Manta-Mari, not even the amount is revealed. So the only on-chain information is a proof that some type of transaction has occurred.
Very interesting.
That's
That's like a very like it's a huge paradigm shift, because I think so many people are used to like going to a block explorer and being able to see everything and kind of trace through how things are happening. So I can see how something like this would be very worrisome potentially to like regulators and maybe like governments and things like that. And I'm not trying to put you in an uncomfortable position, but I think it begs to ask the question: is like, well, in the news today, we're seeing that Uniswap is being investigated by SEC because they want to figure out some way to regulate AMMs or whatever. Now you're building one that's like completely shielded and protects people, which I think most people listening would understand is like a huge value to the consumer. But like, how do you guys see your relationship to regulators and stuff like in regards to this?
Yeah, so I guess a couple of points there. One is just the pattern of blockchain usage, especially with centralized exchanges today, right? Like, I think talking with a lot of people in the space who are really concerned about their privacy, the go to strategy for sort of, I guess, obfuscating their trail is to take their assets, put it into a centralized exchange, and then send a transaction through the centralized exchange to other people. And so what that implies is that people are very conscious about privacy. And in fact, right, like we actually did a survey earlier this year, and we asked around 400 different respondents in the crypto space about what they thought about privacy and their behaviors and stuff. And I think about 75% of them actually stated that they've either avoided making transactions or, hesitated to make a transaction in the past because of these sort of privacy concerns. And so, the question of like, okay, is on-chain privacy really valuable? I think it's undeniably a yes. And so the next question is just like, how do you execute that? Because if it is an undeniably important, critical piece to, I guess just blockchain in general, then you'll see it happen. Then you'll see blockchain either going one of two ways. Either blockchain's going to, really become widely adopted, in which case privacy is really needed, or it's just not going to be adopted. And, that's it, right? But like the way that we see the trends happening, it's definitely the former. And so the question is, how do you implement privacy in a very compliant manner, right? I mean, I think it's a very tricky field because, just as we're exploring it on the forefront, definitely regulators are exploring it on the forefront as well. And so some of the things that we're thinking about, right, is how do we keep out bad actors? And the analogy we like to make here, and I guess it's kind of a really crude analogy, but the analogy we do like to make is one of like a very guarded bathroom where, there's a bouncer in front of the bathroom and he can let you in or not. And just like a normal bathroom, when you're standing outside and just looking at the bathroom, you can see who goes in, who goes out, right? But like what they actually do in the bathroom is their business. No, you don't see that, right? And so for us, that's kind of the same approach that we want to take, but with that added layer of that bouncer in front. And so making sure that the bad actors are, I guess, prevented from entering the system and keeping the system clean is probably our best approach to doing this. And there's several ways of tackling this, right? And so I think we're exploring probably 3 or 4 different options right now. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think compliance and regulation, it's not something we're trying to skirt, right? Like it's definitely something that's very important for us and just the future of our ecosystem. Because I think at the end of the day, right, no one wants to be responsible for funding terrorism or like all these really terrible things that I won't get into. So that's just as much on our community's part as it is on our part. So that's a long-winded way of saying privacy is very necessary. We've heard that from the people we've talked to. We need to implement it very, consciously, and we do want to make sure that it's a clean community.
So how do you feel about like some, like Uniswap starting to do like KYC around the front ends and stuff like that? Like, I mean, do you guys think about those kinds of capabilities, or do you just kind of try to focus on the core network pieces and let other people worry about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's something that we definitely talk about. We think about it. We are a pretty small team. We're 15 people globally. So, about like a third in the US, a third in Europe, and a third in Asia. And so we're definitely trying to prioritize what we need to be thinking about. And so the first thing that we're launching is definitely going to be Manta-Mari Pay. And so that's more on the privacy transacting side. And so it's not a question of like whether we should worry about it. It's more of a question of like when it should be implemented. So it's definitely on our mind. But we also want to keep abreast of like what's going on with Uniswap, what's going on with DeFi in general, and different countries' attitudes towards it, and then we can decide how we move forward with that. But in the short term, we want to build a functional product that the community can see and actually start using, so that they understand that this is a real project, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like, so one of the kind of like traditional pitfalls of any application that kind of focuses around security, privacy, and anonymity is that they're generally kind of a pain in the ass to work with, right? Like they require you to run Tor, which is like slows your internet down a lot, and like you have to manage it being upgraded, or it's like you got to have a VPN, or you got to have some combination of both of those. And I mean, it's never like super simple, right? Like to use a lot of these products. Like, so with MariPay, is it like a wallet? Is it an app? Is it a website? Like how is it done? And like what have you guys tried to do to make the user experience like something that people will actually want to use?
Yeah. So user experience is definitely top of mind. I mean, it's always, if you want to preserve your privacy, right? Like there's always different steps you can take, whether it's Tor, VPNs, or Onion or whatever. But just basically using it at the very fundamental level. We are starting off with our own web application. But I think the longer term goal, which I kind of alluded to at the beginning, is making privacy more of a utility within the Polkadot ecosystem. And I think it's a very unique value proposition that can exist within the Polkadot ecosystem because of the cross chain communication. And so, what we really want to do is create developer tools so that other Parachain projects can start integrating our privacy into their actual ecosystem, into their actual applications. And so, what that implies is that when you look at what Manta Network or Calamari Network looks like a year from now, right? This is something that we would like to be on the back end of different applications. And what that implies is that users can privatize their assets while they're using other applications without even having to think about, oh, this is Manta Network, right? Manta Network may just be that electricity provider, but I mean, in this case, the privacy provider.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what we're going towards, right? And so some of our ideal scenarios is partnering up with different projects that are in the ecosystem who are looking at privacy as a value proposition on top of what they're doing, as well as wallet services, being able to just simply toggle on and off privacy directly through the wallet. That's something that we want to enable as well, right? Trying to be as middleware as possible.
Yeah, I can see. That's obviously one of the biggest value propositions for Polkadot and Kusama is just like this kind of interoperability between the parachains. And it seems like almost every team we've talked to is trying very hard to build things that they're not like trying to build in a silo. They're thinking about how these products are more utilitarian, like in terms of like being able to be used on other platforms. So it'll be fascinating to see a year from now, as all these parachains have rolled out and had some time, if that actually comes to fruition, or if these communities kind of stay independent. Now, you said you guys are aiming to try to be more of a utility, but you're also planning to build an AMM, which is really, really cool. And I know several of the parachain projects are building AMMs or DEXs. What kind of problems do you think having a privatized AMM could solve? I mean, are we talking about like helping alleviate things like front running and sandwich attacks and things like that kind of traditional AMMs and DEXs are having issues with? Can those be prevented because of the privacy, or is it other types of problems being solved?
I think at the core of it, right, like just having that privacy functionality kind of lends itself towards other value propositions being solved on AMM dexes. I think when you think about like MEV front running, this is something that we are currently still researching on our cryptography team side. We have some solutions there, but it's not. I don't think that front running an MEV need to be uniquely solved only through like privacy preserving methods. I think there's definitely a lot of ways to solve those and a lot of different approaches, and I'm sure that other dexes are starting to think about it as well. But specifically to us with the value proposition of privacy, right? It's just a question of being able to allow users to transact without having to worry about I guess their whole identity being mapped and tracked. And this is both on the transacting and the swap side.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume for a lot of these traders, they're leaking strategy as well through all of these different trades and by
Yeah.
people watching what they do. I mean, obviously front running is more automated version of that kind of thing, trading in front of people. But yeah, I think anonymity and privacy brings a whole host of benefits for people that want to actually transact on those things. I could even see like, I mean, hey, I'm kind of biased because I ran Open Bazaar back in the day, but even like marketplaces, digital asset marketplaces and things like that, where you want to be able to transact privately, and you don't necessarily want people to know that you're buying a bunch of whatever cotton candy from Thailand or something. Like who knows? You talked about like the Reddit history. Some people just want to be able to do everything they do normally online with privacy in mind. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
a huge potential area, and I'm surprised that more people aren't working on that. So let's talk a little bit about this is the Parachain Auctions podcast. Sometimes I forget that I get off on a tangent, but let's talk a little bit about the auctions themselves. So did you guys run for batch one? Did you guys go for a Parachain slot in batch one?
No, we did not. Ironically, we were thinking, I guess kind of, picking the brains of the core contributors here, right? Like we were thinking the first batch is probably going to be fairly expensive, right? Because everything's launching, everyone's excited. I wanted to see how things played out. And so we decided that we should take a step back from the first batch. And yeah, I mean, it played out really well, kind of as we expected, right? Like with Akala coming in with the first chain, and it went from like 500k KSM to about like 250 to about like around like the 130, kind of settled around there. So yeah, that was kind of our strategy, to kind of sit back and watch and see what happens.
Yeah, we spoke to Kilt last week, and they had a similar strategy as well. They kind of wanted to observe how things went, which I can understand. It's supposed to be pretty chaotic. You want to see how things go, but it also kind of, we had another conversation with Dieter from Web3,
Mhm.
and he was very direct in saying, look, the amount of Kusama that's like bonded to these crowd loans is not an indication of value in any way, right? Like it shouldn't be, because it's not like it's not really a factor of like price or anything like that, right? It's really an indicator of like how much support a community has for a certain project, that they believe in it, that they want to make sure that they actually get a spot. And the first one, you could probably argue people were excited and maybe didn't know how it was going to shake out and wanted to be a part of it. But we're starting to kind of see like a leveling off of price for that, and I think that's great because it allows other teams to get in, and they don't necessarily have to come up with, I don't know, what is 500,000 KSM right now? It's like hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever, over $100 million. So that's really good to see, and I guess we're looking at probably in the range of about 100 parachains potentially, based on what Web3 is saying. I don't know. I haven't necessarily seen that many teams poke up, but I guess we'll find out soon enough. So as far as the auction goes, you guys, the auction's just started for this second batch. There's going to be 5 more. What has been your like strategy for getting people to contribute? Like what kind of incentives and stuff have you been like putting out there for people, other than what products you're going to be building?
Yeah, so our parachain auction strategy was built on sort of a very, I guess, linear reward system, right? Like, I mean, there's different sort of curves that different strategies have, but ours is just a straight, like, yeah, XY function. But essentially, it's a fixed ratio of being able to receive 10,000 Calamari tokens for every one KSM contributed. And so out of that, we have a total of 30% of our token supply allocated for the crowd loan, for this crowd loan.
Mhm.
And kind of to note on that, right? We have no team tokens, and we have no private investors. And so, the first people who are actually receiving it will be the community contributors. And so, apart from that 30% on that crowd loan, we have a 10% reserve for future PLOs. And so, our strategy here was, we unlock the 30% for I guess crowd loans, but that would equal to about 300k Kusama total, or 3 billion worth of Calamari tokens, of which any unused portion of that 30% is also put into the PLO reserve for future Parachain auction incentives. And so, based on our miscalculation, I guess, we assumed that with the Parachain auctions kind of tapering around the 130 KSM mark, right? We anticipated that maybe for this sort of slot auction, or this batch of auctions, it's probably going to be around like 100 to 150k KSM at the most. But I think there were a few factors that kind of came into play that disrupted that momentum, in a positive way in some sense. But a lot of these tokens, they started popping up on exchanges. And so
Don't look at me.
people started saying, "Oh wow, these returns can be fairly large." And I think that kind of started getting people a little bit more interested in the second Parachain slot auctions as well. And we saw that with Kilt, right? I mean, they maxed out at 220k Kusama, which is almost 2x that of the price of the previous Parachain auction, right? So definitely, I agree with Dieter on that point, right? It's definitely not an indicator of value, especially because no one's paying for anything, right? People are lending things,
Yeah.
and so it's almost like this sort of it's a very fun sort of twist on decentralized governance, in that people are voting with their tokens, staking their tokens, and deciding which projects they want in the ecosystem. Yeah.
So you brought up governance, which made me think about the AMM itself. So how are you guys like strategizing around, one of the biggest issues about kicking off an AMM is like bootstrapping liquidity, and like what exactly will your strategy there be for that?
Yeah, so definitely things like Calamari. Well, I mean, Calamari is going to be first in that regard, right? So, just I guess just a general more sense of like the Calamari vision is that we wanted to start off being that sort of test network for Manta Network, in the sense that we do want to release new features to the community on Calamari first. And this includes new products as well. And so, when we're thinking about liquidity bootstrapping, then that's going to be something that we're going to have to focus on with Calamari first. And so we do have, sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to say this without revealing too much information, because we do have some, I guess, events coming up that will help us with this type of liquidity bootstrapping. And so, yeah, I'm sorry, I don't think I can get into too much detail here, but in the upcoming week or two, you'll definitely be seeing that information. But yeah, so that's going to be helping us with kicking off the AMM decks.
Okay, great. So we'll be hearing more from you guys soon on that. So let's talk a little bit about you guys building out the Parachain. So this is the first time you guys have built this. I mean, a lot of the teams we talked to have already built a lot of smart contracts on Ethereum, or they even had a token and network running on it that they're migrating to a Parachain. Some teams have already built substrate chains and are migrating those to Parachains. What kind of background work have you guys done, or are you guys just going all in on Parachains and this is like the first launch for you guys?
As a collective team, this is definitely our first launch. I mean, we have our own test net, so I guess that counts for something right there. But we decided not to go for our own sort of independent substrate based chain just because it would make subsequent integration with the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem through the Genesis block a little bit too complicated, and we're not entirely certain of exactly how that will actually work. So we decided to forego that route, and then I guess alternatively, right? Like when you mentioned others are building smart contracts, right? We are fully Rust based. We're building as essentially a layer one, and so that means that we don't have the power of Solidity. In fact, we have, I guess, more computational power because we're running a lot leaner, and we don't have to worry about things like the like other applications vying for the same level of compute power on top of the EVM layer. But what that also means is that we therefore couldn't have launched onto Solidity-based platforms before. So yes, I guess in a nutshell, right? Like apart from our testnet, Calamari will be the first run.
Very exciting. Well, so as Kusama has this official slogan, or maybe unofficial slogan, expect chaos. So every time we have people on the show, we like to ask them one final question, which is, how chaotic exactly was all of this for you guys? A score 1 to 10, we call it the chaos score. What would you give how chaotic your journey towards a Parachain slot have been?
I'd say going into it, I would have assumed it would have been like a 4 to 5. Actually participating, it's probably like an 8 or a 9 right now. There's a lot of stories that kind of go into that, right? Like I think our Parachain auction actually started by accident. So what ended up happening was like we were getting ready for it, right? And we were planning on publicly announcing it probably a couple of days later. And so we submitted a pull request to Parity to get our name up there on the board, because before your name appears, you're just a number, and we're number like 2084, and no one has any idea what number 2084 even means. And so, we had our sort of anonymity in that case, right? And so we were on the board, but no one knew who we were, and so no one contributed except ourselves, the core team. We were just testing it out, right? Just to make sure everything was working. And so then we submitted a pull request, and then, the pull request would add our logo and our name to it. And we were thinking, okay, once this goes in, no one's even going to be watching it because the Parachain auctions don't officially begin until September 1st. And then, so we submitted it, and then they pulled it in, and, they did it really quickly. And I wake up because Victor right now, he actually went back to China for a couple of weeks. But I get a 10 calls from him the next morning. He's like, hey, wake up. The Parachain auctions have started. We have 15,000 KSM. And then I jump into the community chats, and it's just all these people asking all these questions. And yeah, so that's where the 4 ramped up to an 8 or a 9 starting from that point. And yeah, there's a lot more stuff going on afterwards, but don't have to go into too many of the details there.
Well, hopefully the Polkadot auctions are similar enough that you guys don't run into any issues with that. You've already, got your stars here on this one. Well, that sounds really exciting, and all of the tech you guys are working on is I mean, it's amazing. I love reading about it, and I love seeing it in action. So thanks again to our guest Kenny today. It was great learning more about Manta Network. And make sure you like, subscribe, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And we'll be sure to bring you along as we get a backstage pass to the world of Parachain auctions. Until next time, I'm Brian Hoffman, and this has been the Parachain Auctions Podcast. This content is not financial or investment advice. All interviews and discussions are opinions only. Kraken does not endorse the accuracy of this content. None of the following information should be construed as a recommendation to support any specific Parachain project or to participate in Parachain auctions in general. See our terms of service for more information.